Okay, looks like we're ready to go. People are joining. I have everybody on mute right now, but anyone can speak up when they have a question or something to say. Is everyone able to hear me now? And please put up your hands if you can't hear me.
If they can't hear you, they won't know to put up their hands.
Yeah, that's right. I realize that. Wasn't a trick question. It's just a dumb moderator. So, but all right, if we got you, we probably got the others. Okay, folks, so it's 1 o'clock. We're going to start the meeting. This is SABR Day 23 meeting of the Southern Michigan chapter. As most of you probably know, we're a merger of the former Detroit chapter and the West Michigan chapter, and we absorbed the Southeast Michigan Don Lund chapter years before that. We also consider our brethren in Toledo as part of our chapter, so we always extend invitations to the Toledo chapter as well. I appreciate you logging in. Later on, we're going to do our trivia. Right now, our digital meister, Rogelio Castillo, is posting the trivia quiz online for those of you who want to check it out. We'll go over the answers at the break, at the 2 o'clock break, and then the answers will be posted on our social media and on our website at 3 o'clock. So first up today, we're going to have a presentation from Chapter Vice President Greg Greenham, University of Windsor, stalwart Canadian baseball historian, apparently not a Tigers fan, given that he had a preview of the trivia quiz last night and said he didn't do so well. But they did really a trivia quiz for Tigers fans. It didn't occur to me if you weren't a Tigers fan that it would not you would not do so well. But the point is, of course, to have fun and learn, and the scores are more or less irrelevant. We have some new stuff coming up this year on our chapter. We're going to talk about them at the end of the meeting on the chapter business. We're going to try to organize, and if we get enough people, we will organize an in-person meeting at the House of David Museum in St. Joseph. I toured it last December. It really is interesting. And the proprietor of the museum, Chris Siriano, is an historian of the House of David baseball team, is working with Phil Dixon, eminent Negro League historian, on a new book about House of David. I'm optimistic about that meeting, but because it's a long drive for a lot of people in Michigan, it's actually closer to people in Chicago in many cases. We're going to invite the Chicago chapter members, the Indianapolis chapter members, Fort Wayne chapter members, as well as Toledo and Southern Michigan. If we get about 24 people, we may get Phil Dixon in to make a trip to see us. We're also going to be restarting our book clubs. At the end of the meeting, going to have a discussion of our upcoming book club. We haven't picked a date yet, which will be about Mark Harris's baseball novels. I'm sure you've all read them, right? You're at least familiar with Bang the Drum Slowly, even if it's only via the movie. So we're going to have a book club meeting discussing the quartet of baseball novels of Mark Harris. The others are not nearly so famous as Bang the Drum Slowly, and then the movie. And that should be a fascinating discussion. The novels are all pretty small. They're easy reads. And if you're a baseball fan with any gray hair, you should enjoy them. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Craig Greenham and let him talk about our initiative to bring research back into our chapter and to do some good work in the future.
Thanks so much, Gary. Can everybody hear me? I've unmuted my microphone. Everybody can hear me. That's terrific. Okay. Is there a way, Gary, you can allow me to screen share? It looks like you have the power.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure everyone in the waiting room is admitted here. We've got people joining that I hadn't seen. All right, it looks like we're all in. Okay. So, all right. So why don't you talk while I figure out how to let you handle the screen share.
Just a heads up, Gary. The tweet is out.
Oh, good. Okay. And right. That's Rogelio telling us.
Hi, Rogelio. How are you?
Good. How you guys doing? It's been a while.
Doing real well, doing real well. Okay, so I had a deck created. Oh, maybe I can,
There you go. I see it.
what can you see?
I can see the Zoom screen. So if you have a share deck, wherever that may be, just go ahead and pop that open.
It says host disabled participant from screen sharing.
All right, then I hit the wrong button. All right, so let me go back to you. And
If it's problematic, Gary, we can proceed without the
well,
deck.
go ahead and talk while I'm trying to figure
Okay.
out while I'm admitting.
Sure. So I jotted down a couple remarks here that accompanied the slides. But anyway, I would like to thank Gary for allowing me a few minutes to share my vision for research with the chapter. I usually speak in 80-minute blocks, but I'm keenly aware that no one tunes into anything to listen to a vice president speak. So I'll try to keep my remarks quite brief.
Hey, excuse me for interrupting, but I can't resist the urge to tell a story, which a lot of people don't know. You know that one of FDR's vice presidents said that the vice presidency wasn't worth a warm pitcher of spit, right?
Yes.
John Nance Garner, except that was sanitized. The real quote was a warm pitcher of piss. So I presume you have a warm pitcher of something on your desk.
Just water in this case, Gary, but yes, I appreciate the colorful anecdote for sure. So a point of emphasis for our chapter moving forward is that research has to be central to what we do. That's what separates us from other associations. So a marked difference between SABR and the Mayo Smith Society, for example, is our affinity and our appreciation for research. It's our active pursuit of knowledge, along with that mutual love for baseball, that serves as the bedrock for our membership. So SABR is organized, as you well know, along geographical bounds or boundaries. And Southern Michigan's connection to baseball should never be relegated. It's been and has been and will be essential to our research efforts. But our membership is diverse, and we know that. And we need to find ways to provide meaningful membership experiences for people living locally whose interests aren't entirely local. Aligned with that is our willingness to look beyond historical inquiry to other fields of research. That includes areas such as analytics, media studies, and industry/business dimensions. This big tent approach, if we want to call it that, reflects the dynamic potential of SABR and will help us attract new members and retain the ones that we have. It's terrific to create knowledge, but I feel that researchers are duty bound to share what they have unearthed. So with that in mind, I encourage our SABR members to maximize the value of their labor. A major initiative for us moving forward is to breathe new life into our website, which includes our newsletter. So we'll keep you abreast of the developments there and how you can contribute your work. SABR has a lot of different research outputs, and if you've joined research communities, you'll see ways in which your research can be shared with the membership. If you're interested in sharing beyond the SABR network, think about ways you can contribute to popular media, and this includes retrospectives in newspapers, podcast contributors, things like that. And you can also seek out speaking engagements with local institutions that support research and knowledge creation. Aligned with that, think about conferences you can speak at, including SABR-related conferences. It's my goal to ensure that members know about these opportunities and the ways in which they can connect beyond being an attendee. A great aspect of SABR membership is the community that you can tap into. One of the elements I'd like to create in time is a network of members interested in research that could serve as peer reviewers for a variety of research outputs. So getting this feedback, if you've been through the process, you'll know that this will strengthen your work and help make the best contributions possible. So stay tuned for developments and opportunities on that front. So thank you very much for your time. I will maybe send out something on a mailer. I know Gary's got a very active or an active member list, and I can put out my information in terms of email and contact stuff. So that way we can discuss things further if you see the need. That's all I have, Gary.
Okay. Anyone have any questions or comments before I introduce our featured guest? Put up your hand or speak up.
As I say to my students, clear as mud, right?
Yeah, presumably this is an older group than your students, right?
Mostly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Okay, good. So as I said, if there's any questions or if you want to continue this conversation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get our emailer list from Gary and I'll send out a blast. Maybe I'll send out my slide deck. It's not particularly more informative than what you've heard, but maybe having that will serve as a reminder that you want to have a conversation, and we can take it from there.
Okay, thanks, Craig. I don't see that anyone's got their hand up to comment right now. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to introduce our featured speaker today is Cody Stavenhagen, the Tigers beat writer for The Athletic. I'm not sure what he did bad in a past life to deserve last season on the beat, but he is returned for 2023. I find his columns, his pieces in The Athletic to be really informative. I recommend them to my Tiger fans, friends all over the country. He's relatively new to the beat. I don't remember how many years he's been on it, 4 or 5, but he's got amazing connections, good insights, and he doesn't repeat the standard pablum, which I really do appreciate. Cody, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point. He's going to speak for however long he feels like it, and then we're going to take questions for him until 2 o'clock. Cody, we have you out there?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Gary. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks to everyone for joining today's meeting. I think I mostly want to just get to, take questions from you guys. I'll start with a little spiel. I think being a beat writer, the longer I do it, I think has to be one of the strangest jobs in the world. It's a dream job, but there's so many things you don't think about. You are in a major league clubhouse and at a major league stadium every day, but you're not. You don't work for the team. You're not one of the players. You're not one of the coaches. You're there as a third party, and everything you do is so deeply ingrained and related to the team you cover. Scott Harris can ruin my day at any point just by making a move. Not ruin my day, but change my plans, if you know what I mean. So much of it is dependent on other people. There's a lot of standing around in the job, which they don't tell you about, waiting for a player to be at his locker, standing there during batting practice, hoping someone will come chat with you. Your colleagues on the beat are actually your competition, but you spend more time with them than you will your family. I don't go on every single road trip, but there's a lot of times on the road, 75 plus nights a year for sure, including spring training. But all that said, there's so many incredible pinch yourself moments. And when you cover a team like the 2022 Tigers, you really have to value those moments. Being in Fenway Park, calling a radio broadcast with Dan Dickerson, things like that. But the inside story of the 2022 Tigers was so probably uninteresting on the surface, but really interesting when you were there and watching it unfold every day, as a lot of people were in bad moods, as a lot of players were having difficult seasons. As you saw AJ Hinch kind of try to keep a clear head, knowing that there was turmoil going on in the front office. And as a beat writer, you can easily be caught in the crosshairs of all that. There can be a lot of politics that goes on. People maybe trying to leverage you for favorable coverage, or people trying to phase you out, or how do you develop a good relationship with someone while realizing you can never quite be their friend, because at the end of the day, you have to be an objective journalist. So, I think I went through a lot on that last year, and I'm happy to take questions, regarding some of that. But, in terms of the 2023 Tigers, again, might seem uninteresting on the surface. I think, did a fan survey at The Athletic. Interest is not crazy high right now, but the beautiful thing about baseball, the closer you get to spring training, the more it can easily draw you right back in. I was thinking a little bit about this Tigers roster, and just the little things that we're all going to be attuned to in another month. Akil Baddoo or Kerry Carpenter in the outfield, Spencer Torkelson, what type of player is he actually? All these things, the more you really think about him, you can get excited and start to feel that passion come back. That's why I do this job. I'm sure that's why many of you are members of SABR or fans of the game. And it's been interesting to see all the things going on behind the scenes with the Tigers lately. Scott Harris has a lot to prove. I told someone he's kind of like the Matt Vierling of baseball executives. Now he has this tremendous profile, right? Like Vierling has sprint speed and exit velocity, but not actually proven success. Scott Harris has this youth and he's a forward thinking guy. He values numbers and data and analytics, and he's worked for Theo Epstein and he's worked for Farhan Zaidi. But at the end of the day, he's unproven as a lead executive. I think the biggest thing will just be changes to the old guard, the old way of doing things, overhauling the scouting department, with Robin Metzler now running scouting, I think is going to be a huge difference maker in the organization. It seems pretty clear Scott has a plan to take things, I don't know if slowly is the right word, but it doesn't seem like they're in any rush to win in 2023. For better or for worse. But I really do think the infrastructure of this organization is going to be a lot more healthy. And, I think as a beat writer, I've really tried to internalize that and think, how can I cover the big and the small the best way for the readers, for the fans? How can I tell compelling human stories while still being real about both good and bad things that happen in the organization? And that can also be a very delicate balance to do. I think sometimes in this job, I feel like I'm torn between, it'd be great if I could just write feature stories and long form journalism. And that's what I love the most. But sometimes that conflicts with covering the performance of the team. How can I take you inside the front office as much as I can and help explain their thinking at the same time? Sometimes you have to be critical of the front office, and those two things can be kind of competing interests. I try to really pride myself on honesty and writing what is true. That's kind of my core principle. And, I hope that comes through in my work. So I don't know. I think that's just really a general spiel about me and the job. And other than that, I'd love to just open it up to questions. I'm happy to talk about the Tigers, baseball, journalism, myself, music, anything you guys got. Feel free to fire away.
Cody, I want to ask you one question before we throw it open to the group. Approximately what day, week of the last season did everyone, you think, realize the season was completely lost? Because while I think most people understood, especially you and the media, that the expectations going into 2022 were overwrought, no one expected it to go this badly. When do you think everyone sort of realized this is going to be a shit show and it isn't going to get any better?
It was pretty early, to tell you the truth. I think you could feel it in May. I'm not talking about just fans or just Twitter. I mean, you could feel it in the clubhouse. Guys just kind of in sullen moods. I think the manager and the coaching staff, after another injury, just when another pitcher would go down, you could feel it. It was pretty early in the year. AJ Hinch had the press conference where he talked about, it's these drives home to Birmingham are getting rough. And, I know it wore on everybody, and it did. It started very early because so many things just went wrong. I mean, when Riley Green got hurt in spring training, that was kind of a precursor. And then Mize and Manning were down in the first road trip of the year. I think this was even before Eduardo Rodriguez left the team. You could Austin Meadows was on the injured list. The team was just losing. They were not playing clean baseball. I don't think the clubhouse was ever necessarily at odds with each other, but it was just a tense environment. A lot of personalities that I don't think, it's not like guys hated each other, but it definitely was not a tight knit group really at all. And I remember saying in May, like, I feel like the season's over. And I think those guys in the room, you know, although they could never admit it, I think they started feeling it pretty early in the year.
It's interesting because that's right about the same time as the 2021 season turned around to everyone against
Yeah.
everyone's expectations after that horrid start. I mean, one of the beauties of baseball is, of course, unfounded optimism, and it sustains a lot of fans and a lot of teams through a lot of bad years because people don't figure out, and legitimately so, until mid-season or later, that their team is out of it in many cases. And it was, you know, I had written off the 2021 team, and then they just concluded this miraculous turnaround. And so I was hesitant to write off the 2022 team. 2022 was exactly what I expected out of 2021. Started bad and was going to get worse. Anyway, okay, I'm going to try to have faith in the crowd here and let people speak up without trying to moderate the questions.
Yeah, putting questions in the chat might be the easiest way to do it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, let's
have-
start with that, and because there are already a couple in here, and you know, if anyone feels the need to interject or speak up, that's totally fine with me. But let's start with just putting some questions in the chat, or if you even, this is what the Tigers do with their press conferences. If they're on Zoom, you just put question in the chat, and then you can kind of speak your question out loud. If we want to do it that way, we can do that. But
Okay.
we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like Bill. How are we pronouncing this? Bill Sproul?
Bill Sproul.
Bill Sproul. All right, thanks, Bill. You know, asked me to describe background to becoming a beat writer. I don't know if my story is all that interesting. It's kind of typical. I think I was in high school and loved the game and had that very familiar realization that probably wasn't going to play beyond high school, or I probably could have played at Clarendon Community College in West Texas. Would have been a complete waste of 2 years of my life. And so really started thinking, you know, what do I want to do? What else am I good at? And writing was something that was on that radar. And I, you know, of course, followed baseball and baseball media. I remember reading one of Tim Kirchin's books that really provided a great glimpse into his life as a traveling baseball beat writer for, you know, covering the Orioles, especially in the 80s and into the 90s. And I kind of thought, you know what? I think that's what I want to do. It's a way to stay in the game. It's a way to stay connected. So went off to college at Oklahoma State and studied journalism with focus in sports media. And it was really there, I think I figured out I loved journalism as much, or maybe even more than I did baseball. Definitely the craft of writing, but also just the I don't know, kind of the American ideal of the free press, and back then, you know, the beauty of a daily newspaper and how it played roles in society. And so in college, I, you know, did a ton of sports, but also served as news editor and editor-in-chief of our campus newspaper. And I think that really helped grow my perspective and make me really want to continue forward in this path. It's certainly a competitive industry, and the realities of it, you know, there are people who, people like Bill Simmons who have made it big through blogs, but generally this is a field where the best path is to start young and be willing to relocate. And so that makes it difficult, but you know, in my early 20s, what I was dead set on doing. So did a lot of internships, you know, summers, started in my hometown of Amarillo, Texas at the Amarillo Globe News. I covered rodeos and all sorts of stuff. Worked at the Oklahoman in Oklahoma City, which was a great experience. I was fortunate enough to get 2 MLB.com internships. I covered the Texas Rangers for one summer. I covered the Cubs and White Sox in Chicago for a summer. Also spent a winter in Minneapolis covering like girls high school hockey. And then my first job was back in Oklahoma through connections I had made there. You know, they asked me if I wanted to come work for the Tulsa World, the newspaper in Tulsa, and it was a real job with benefits and all that. So I took it and I covered the Oklahoma Sooners, mostly football and basketball for 2 years. And it was a hell of a time to be on that beat between Baker Mayfield and Trey Young and Kyler Murray and Lincoln Riley and all sorts of guys getting arrested and doing terrible and or dumb things off the field. So sometimes it felt like you were halfway a court reporter. But I really, as I mentioned, loved the human interest, the craft of features and writing. And at the time, there was this upstart thing called The Athletic that I was really interested in. And I was lucky enough to get it actually started with a Twitter DM from Craig Custance, who was a ESPN NHL writer, now is a way up high in the athletic hierarchy. And he was like, hey, could we talk on the phone? And I was like, sure. And he offered me a job covering Michigan football. And I was like, do you want to move to Michigan? And I was like, well, not really. But I wanted to work for the Athletic. The money was better. The freedom of the job was better. And so I took it. But I did that knowing I always wanted to get back into baseball. So that's really what I wanted to do. I was kind of tired of the dictatorship of college football coaches and just the weird culture that is college. And I love baseball. So the Tigers job came open after just 1 year, and I took that, and this is now going into my 5th season on the beat. So that's kind of a broad overview of that path. Go on into, looks like we've got Tony Malika. Shout out Tony for the question. What do you expect from Tarek Skubal in 2023 and the future? I think the two guys that I really bang the table for on the Tigers are Riley Green and Tarek Skubal. We'll see obviously how recovery from flexor tendon surgery goes for Skubal. It was not a clean road back for Matt Boyd last year. He barely pitched. But I think Skubal is so good and a late bloomer and continuing to get better and learn how to use his stuff better. He's got a terrific fastball that plays atop the zone. He's got a slider. He's really learned how to use his changeup when it's working, can be his best pitch. I think Skubal has a really high ceiling, provided he can stay healthy. Every now and then he's succumbed to high pitch counts, and now with the arm injury, and every now and then I worry, like, is there a world in which he turns into a power reliever down the line? But I think until something happens that really leads to that, I think Skubal could be a high-end number 2 starter on a competitive team. Go on to one from Mark O'Keefe. Is it harder to be a fan when you are close to the team? Never meet your heroes. Yeah, I think in a way it's weird. Journalism really does kind of train the fan out of you, I guess. I went to Oklahoma State and was covering sports from day one. So I was never a big Oklahoma State Cowboys fan. I grew up a University of Texas fan, so that helped. I didn't really go in with that allegiance, but I kind of went in covering sports as a journalist. And I'm a much bigger OSU fan now than I am when I was covering those teams, because it's, number one, if you're being a fan while you're being a journalist, you're not being a good journalist. Number two, being that close and hearing the dirt and sometimes having bad experiences with players who are an asshole or an executive who blows you off, it can definitely make it very hard to be to maintain that same level of allegiance. I think sports in general, I don't see it the same way. I think the Dallas Cowboys are like the only team I'm still like a irrational fan of. I grew up a TBS Braves fan, and I guess I still like to see the Braves succeed, but it's not like I wear Braves gear or follow the Braves. It's easier. Again, I never, had an allegiance to the Tigers coming into this, so I've certainly never been a Tigers fan. Although I will tell you that after 4 or 5 years of this, I would love to cover a competitive team. That would make my life so much better. So it's not that I'm rooting for them in a fan way, but there is kind of an interest in covering a winning team. It's better for me as a journalist. And yeah, the never meet your heroes thing is there are people you have bad experiences with, and there are people you have great experiences with. And I think a lot of journalists will tell you, you just come to root for the good story, the good person, the good story. And that's definitely very much how I see it. We've got a question here from Mitchell. Says, do you see Scott Harris drafting, signing more athletes, quick twitch muscle guys in the future? This is an interesting one. And I don't know that we know quite enough about Scott and more specifically, his new chief scouts to know for sure. Al Avila, actually, believe it or not, really invested in toolsy guys like Daz Cameron and really looked at bodies and frames. And Victor Reyes was 6'4", and could he fill out? And the farm was really full of those guys, a lot of whom lacked actual baseball ability, or not. They didn't actually have tangible good hit tools. There was a lot of projection. It was a lot, I think, based on skills and athleticism more than I think Scott Harris is going to look a lot at exit velocities and walk rates and strike rates and spin rates. And that usually ties in with naturally good athletes. But I think there's probably going to be more emphasis on guys who are good at baseball, and you have reason to project that they will continue to become better at baseball. I've heard AJ Hinch mention that before, that you look at the Astros, and Jose Altuve was never a guy who was going to project as an elite level athlete, but he had tremendous baseball skills. I think the Astros have developed a lot of guys like that who can just flat out hit, which isn't always necessarily related to, you have to have hand-eye coordination, you have to have quick hands, but I think as a scout, scouts evaluate that a little differently. And I'd expect to see, I think Harris is going to be pretty data-driven more than anything. And that will lead to, yes, guys who are athletic, but it's not going to be solely based on body type, if that makes any sense. A question from Matt Leduc. Are you excited to be part of the Miggy farewell tour? Miggy's an interesting one to cover. I don't think that's really a secret to anyone in Detroit. Sometimes he's a moody personality is probably the best way to describe it. Sometimes really friendly, sometimes completely standoffish. But I've tried to remember that this is history. I think one of the absolute best experiences of my career was the day before Miguel's 3,000th hit. He kind of held court at his locker. He was in one of those the good Miguel moods, and he really opened up on what the chase for 3,000 had been like for him. He talked about his relationship with Al Kaline, and he talked about his son and growing older and younger players in the organization. And it was like, this is really seeing a legend open up a little bit on the cusp of a historic achievement. Jerry Green, a longtime Detroit sports writer, was in the press box, that day, and he was talking about his memories of covering Kaline's 3,000th hit, and he brought a newspaper and had the story he wrote after Kaline hit 3,000. I thought that was really cool perspective that kind of made me think, let's appreciate this, let's take it in. I'm not going to remember Miguel as one of the favorite athletes I covered, but he will be absolutely one of the greatest athletes I've covered. In terms of the farewell tour, it kind of seems like this entire 4 or 5 years has been one big farewell tour. I think I'm going to get tired of all the questions of how cool was it when Miggy got a portrait from the Padres or whatever. I think these farewell tours can be a little bit overwrought. At the same time, I'm going to be reminding myself that, hey, you're covering an all-time great, a Hall of Famer. And, obviously Tigers fans have come out to support him during 500, during 3,000. And this will be, kind of the last chance to see one of the better players of an entire generation. So it is important to recognize that. Got one from Stuart Shea. With the level of media managing that clubs engage in, how do you differentiate yourself? Does it help that you don't have to do game stories in the same way as the newspaper reporters? Very good question. I think, as a writer, love that I don't have to come to the park and do a gamer and notes like I would if I worked for a traditional newspaper. We have a little more freedom at The Athletic. Still cover the day-to-day of the team, but definitely don't write traditional game stories. I think there are pros and cons of that. You know, I think going up to players, I think sometimes can be more favorable, knowing that I'm not necessarily going to ask them a million little questions about their performance that day. Generally, if I'm going up to a guy, especially if it's not in a scrum, if it's more in a one-on-one setting, I have something more tangible or maybe more interesting I actually want to talk to that guy about. You know, I think the club can recognize that and sometimes recognize maybe we're a better outlet for any big feature story that might be laying out there. At the same time, sometimes I worry it hurts me if I'm not freaking out to confirm that they signed Cesar Hernandez to a minor league contract. And I definitely try, and I've actually tried more to stay on top of transactions and to do the breaking news, because that still is a part of my job. But I don't know, there can be sometimes an allegiance to the reporters who hone in on every little detail. I try to differentiate myself regardless of what the club or players or anyone thinks. You know, I hope my work stands out as different, as if it's baseball analysis, more in depth. If it's a human interest story, more it's something that'll make you feel something, more behind the scenes, more big picture, whatever it is. I do try to make sure my work doesn't read the same as a lot of other outlets out there, because I think if it does, that's, you know, not good for our business model and generally my you know, my career as a writer. So I hope that answers the question a little bit. Happy to follow up on some of this after looks like we got a lot of questions pouring in. So go ahead and get on to some others. This one from Thomas. Curious how you view your audience. The Athletic and your writing in particular has raised the bar for beat writing. There's more of a verification these days between knowledgeable and online fans and casual fans. Is there a temptation to keep things a common denominator level to reach a wider audience? I've seen this evolve over time. You know, I think when I first started writing for The Athletic and it was still newer and smaller, we definitely had a highly educated, intense fan base. And unlike every website in the history of the world, the comment section was often a productive space where people would either say nice things or just have intelligent debates about their own views. As The Athletic has grown and take off, and now we're owned by the New York Times, it's awesome that we have a wider audience, but the comment section now much more resembles Facebook in that it turns into vitriol and people insulting each other and people insulting me. I think we're lucky, you know, still have a highly educated and passionate fan base. And I think that's the main, you know, anyone who's paying to read and subscribe probably cares. And I think that's more what I try to cater my writing to. I think as a company at large, there has been a little shift toward a wider audience. I think that's manifested less through like the stories I write and more through an emphasis on news. You know, if you look, we have more of like a news tab. If you go to the MLB page, we do kind of more league wide, you know, where they'll poll all the beat writers and say, what was your team's most underrated move of the offseason? And you answer that question and we run a story. I think we do more things that are aimed toward a broader base. But I think the thrust of our model is still in-depth and hyper local coverage. I think those are kind of the fans that are kind of paying the bills for the company more than anything. So hopefully I'm right in that, because I definitely feel like I, for the most part, try to tailor my coverage more toward that. Timothy Carr, I remember fondly when Chris Fetter spoke at our SABR meeting. Is he doing as well as I thought I would be? If so, are we going to be able to keep him? Wow, I didn't know Fetter spoke at one of these. He is a much better guest than I am, I can tell you that. I think Chris Fetter is one of the smartest people I've ever met in baseball, and I knew that within 5 minutes of meeting him when he was still at the University of Michigan. I have a pretty good relationship with Chris, and I think he's a huge upgrade for the Tigers. we'll see, you know, what type of talent he has to work with, but we've seen pitchers in this system develop a lot. You know, we saw a lot of guys in the bullpen make strides. We've seen guys like Bill Brisky and Wilmer Flores come out of nowhere. One thing, even though Fetter is kind of the pitching coach of the major league team, I do think he functions a little bit like a director of pitching for the entire organization. He definitely has a say in the way pitching is taught, works closely with Gabe Rebus and the minor league coaches to kind of make this run more horizontally rather than vertically through the system, if that makes any sense. The question of can the Tigers keep him? Well, he turned down an opportunity to be the head coach at Michigan last year, so that's a good sign. You know, there's always a chance a bigger market team could come and poach him, but Fetter had other job offers before. You know, I think he took the Tigers job under a very specific set of circumstances. He could stay in Michigan, although I think he's since bought a home in Florida. He wanted to work for AJ Hinch, someone he knew, someone he trusted. A way it was described to me last year around the time Fetter was kind of in the mix for the Michigan head coaching job is like Fetter and AJ just now got the keys to this car. They haven't really fully been able to drive it yet, with it being their own, with it being their system, their players. Now, the Scott Harris regime versus the Al Avila regime. And so I've always gotten the sense that Fetter's pretty committed to kind of seeing this through and being here for, you know, a few more years at minimum. And after that, it becomes professional sports and everyone eventually gets fired or goes elsewhere. But I think for the next few years, I think Fetter's pretty committed to this. Good one from David Lambert. Is Harris doing the house cleaning that Avila failed to do? David, if you're on here, what sort of house cleaning are we referring to? Are we talking players? Are we talking staff? Are we talking something else?
Primarily staff.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think Harris came on right away and you saw David Chad, the assistant GM, was gone. Scott Pleiss, the scouting director, was gone. You know, hired Rob Metzler, hired Mark Connor from the Padres in scouting positions, very quickly put some of his own guys in there. And you know, I think those were the right moves. I think he identified people that were stuck in old ways of doing things and he made changes. It was interesting, the people that stayed on, Sam Minzen, Jay Sartori, both assistant GMs, the Tom Moore and the international staff. I was actually very surprised they all stayed on, but some of it might be more gradual changes. I think he immediately put smart people in big positions. I think he wanted to keep a little bit of an existing structure rather than just fire everybody. I think Minzen and Sartori are both younger, smart guys who I know and who I think they're smart. I think if Harris thought they were bad at their jobs, I don't think they'd still be around. I think he conferred with AJ Hinch and a lot of other people throughout the game about people around the staff. Obviously, the coaching staff looks entirely different than it did in the Ron Gardenhire regime. Different types of coaches. Minor league system has been completely overhauled. That started under Avila because Avila knew he had to if he wanted to keep his job. It didn't ultimately work out, but Harris has only continued that. So that's a way of saying I think Scott's continued to do, immediately did some pretty important house cleaning and will probably continue to tweak and shape things in the coming years. Good one from Craig Greenham. Can you describe the journalistic battle of being first versus being accurate and correct? Yeah, I think that's something every journalist deals with, and it really has only gotten worse in today's, 24/7 news cycle where everything's Twitter. That's always a delicate balance for me because the reality is Twitter is a part of my life and my job and my audience. I also hate Twitter and think everything would be better if it didn't exist, but that's not reality. And even if Twitter dies under its current leadership, something else will probably come and replace it. So I think this is just what we're stuck with. For me, if I can be first, that's great. I've actually tried to push myself to do more, as I mentioned, of the transactions and the sources said this and sources said that. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of that lives for 5 seconds on the internet. A lot of it goes to national reporters anyway. I feel like I've brought my brand more on trying to provide a definitive account or a behind the scenes story or the best analysis of what happens rather than being the one to break it. Breaking things as being important. Now, there are a million stories that I was close to breaking last year and had it, but always went for that other confirmation. I think the risk of being wrong and completely diminishing your credibility is something that terrifies me. And sometimes I wonder, like, could I have run with that? Like, maybe, maybe not. I definitely don't report anything unless I'm 1000% certain, which means usually it's coming from multiple people or a source who I know is absolutely in the know. As journalists, we can all feel that pressure to be quicker, to be faster. Twitter doesn't help it. I don't like that culture, but it is the reality. One from Bill Collins. Cody, what surprised you regarding the athletics survey of Tiger fans? I think one of the most surprising ones, there's a question, what Tigers prospect are you most excited about? And number one vote getter was Colt Keith with more than 30% of the vote. Colt Keith had a great year last year, was injured, but hit over 300 in high A, really raked in the Arizona Fall League. And I think that's what encourages me more than anything he did at high A. But I think that spoke to a couple of things. One, what type of subscribers, readers do we have? Well, clearly people who are pretty knowledgeable about the Tigers system if they chose a fifth round pick who's yet to advance above high A as their most exciting prospect. I was still just kind of surprised to see that over the bigger names, the first round picks, the Jackson Jobs, the Jace Young. And I think Colt Keith is a good prospect. I also still think he has a hit tool that's going to play, but still has some things to prove at the upper level as well. I wasn't really surprised with it generally being a more pessimistic survey. It seemed like as a whole, the people who took this survey liked to hire Scott Harris, had some faith in the new front office, but overall definitely weren't fired up about the 2023 season. That didn't really surprise me. Wasn't a lot of love for Chris Ilitch. That didn't surprise me. I just thought it was also an interesting balance. You had a lot of people who were either unsure or maybe a little pessimistic about the direction of the franchise, but then the majority of people still thought the Tigers would make the playoffs in 2025. So just a couple of years from now, those two things kind of compete with each other. But maybe that goes back to having some faith in the new leadership. Bill Collins, how do you make storytelling about Scott Harris's infrastructure overhaul more interesting? Yeah, great question. It's been, I think I've tried to slowly tell a bigger story about what's going on and why certain things are happening. It can be hard when some of these people aren't always available to the media. For example, the entire coaching staff. AJ doesn't let talk, which is frustrating from my standpoint. But I think these things will kind of trickle out with time. I think over spring training there will be some ways to put a face on what's actually happening through a player's success, through maybe if Ryan Garco or someone does talk. I don't know. I think it's trying to find one thing that's happening with a player or the organization, and then finding out how does this tell a bigger story about what's happening with the Tigers as a whole. So I don't know, Bill, does that answer your question at all? Not sure if we're going to get a response from Bill there. Bill, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, we will move on. It seems to me that virtually every MLB team in the past 30 years who's decided to emphasize athleticism over baseball skills has failed badly, related from Craig Greenham. Buck Martinez's book Changeup is really good overview of the KC Royal Baseball Academy. Yeah, that's a super interesting point. I think the Dodgers emphasize athleticism a decent amount, or more in the Scott Harris mold, a lot of data which can be related to athleticism, a lot of projectability and upside more than baseball skills, and the Dodgers do a tremendous job of getting the most out of their players. But yeah, the Royals, I mean, terrific example, even in the mid 2000s, built a team off really gritty homegrown baseball players, not guys who were superstars. You know, that was the Braves model for a good long time. They had athletes, but really they had baseball players. I'm sure you can find examples of athletic teams or teams that emphasize athleticism, but I tend to agree with you. I think baseball skills and athleticism are two different things. And ultimately, I think baseball skills is what helps you win games. Got one from Thomas, comment on the Tigers minor league prospects worth mentioning. Thomas, are you out here? Could you get a little more specific on what you'd like to hear about?
Yes, thanks for recognizing my question. Seen a couple of posts where they ranked the minor league teams, and the Tigers are on the bottom.
Yeah.
So they've had a few guys go up to the Tigers within the last 2 years or so. But who else is in the system that we can project as a starter or a major league roster player?
Yeah, good question. You know, Keith Law in The Athletic put the Tigers 30th out of 30. Kylie McDaniel of ESPN had them 21 out of 30. I think sometimes with these prospect rankings and projections, it can be a lot of splitting hairs. I think the Tigers, obviously their upper end prospects have graduated or no longer prospects. When I look at, say, the Tigers' top 10 prospects, I think this farm system is finally attaining some depth. You have a longer list of names, so it's like this guy can contribute in the major leagues. I also see why someone would be very pessimistic about it, because do you have any sure things? I'm not sure. Jackson Jobe might become an ace, or he might not amount to much of anything. Jace Young has a great hit tool, but does he have a position? He didn't super impress in High A West Michigan last year. But if you go down the list, guys are intriguing. From Wilmer Flores, I think Christian Santana, young middle infielder, has as much upside as anyone. Your crop of international prospects is definitely at the least more interesting, with Santana, Manuel Sakura, Abel Bastidas, Roberto Campos. Most of these guys are still 17, 18, 19, so it's very tough to peg what exactly they're going to be. But I think there's more talent there from the international pipeline than there has been in a long time. And then the pitching, you know, guys, Ty Madden, Dylan Smith, Reese Olson. I think you have a lot of pitching depth, but do you have top end guys? I think you have a lot of 4 and 5 starters or swingman type relievers. And so that's where so much of this comes down to player development. And I think that's why Keith Law was so pessimistic on the Tigers, because they have not developed players well for a decade plus. Obviously, there's now Ryan Garco and a whole new staff overseeing that, and early evidence in the case of guys like Parker Meadows, Colt Keith, Wilmer Flores last year to suggest that maybe things are going to tick up. Overall, I think right now the Tigers are a bottom third farm system, but they made some there were a lot of encouraging signs last year. And this year, when you look at guys like Santana, Jobe, Flores, Keith, do these guys really emerge as surefire top 100, top 50 prospects, or does their development stall? Do they fall off? I mean, took me this long to mention Dylan Dingler, who everyone was fired up about last year, and now things have kind of died down. That's the nature of prospects, though. Even the best scouts in the world, the people who do this for a living, can only project so much.
Could you mention briefly how you would rate their development team? You know, are they top third, bottom third, right in the middle? It seems like you mentioned quite a few prospects, but they don't develop them properly or correctly, or So is that a scouting issue or is that more of a developmental issue?
I think under Alavila, the Tigers had problems with both scouting and development. We already talked about the types of players they were looking for. There was pretty much no one in the system who walked, for instance, a lot of guys with high chase rates. And then the Tigers rarely optimized those talents. I mean, Gregory Soto was their only positive WAR international player, since Willie Adames, who obviously never played for the Tigers. I think this new staff is better. Ryan Garco was hired last year under Avila. Really, as I mentioned, a lot of this stuff also runs through Fetter and Hinch now. They function less as kind of the old fashioned, we just worry about the major league team, and their influence is felt more throughout the system. Seems like they now have, I would say, probably an upper third in terms of the people running it. But it's going to take more time before we really know, okay, is this working? Are they a top third developmental team? It's a little early to judge. They are fighting an uphill battle. They're not going to become as good as the Dodgers or the Astros or the Braves overnight. So they're still below. They're not top 5. Could they be top 10? Maybe. We'll go on one from John Burbridge. Why so many injuries with starting pitchers? In this case of bad luck or training issues? $1 million question, John. I wish I knew. I would say it probably amounts to some of both. Last year, anyone who followed the team knows there was just an inordinate amount of bad luck. It was crazy. At the same time, when that many pitchers go down, when that many young pitchers go down, you definitely start to worry. Tigers overhauled a lot of their training staff. I think that was another area in which they were behind. They were old-fashioned. I think their trainers were known for treating the symptoms of injuries, but not doing near the prehab or injury prevention that modern teams are doing. So many teams now have ways that I don't even fully understand in terms of using science and biomechanics to measure the level of fatigue on players, the level of stress on a player's arm. My understanding is the Tigers really were not doing that. And I think some of the new hires they made this offseason were designed to correct that. Now, at the same time, if you haven't read Jeff Passan's book, The Arm, I highly recommend it. Super illuminating book. And it's crazy. We know more about the arm and arm health than we ever have before. We also have more pitchers getting injured than ever before. I don't think we're that far away from pitchers basically saying, hey, just give me elective Tommy John surgery so that I'll miss a year and then I know I'll be good for 10 years after that. It's really crazy, and it's kind of crazy how despite all the advances we've made, how little we actually know about the best way to keep arms healthy right now. I don't think any team has a magic bullet solution, but the biggest way the Tigers were behind was generally just the way their training staff operated. I don't know how much that trickles into their throwing programs or their workouts, but I think there will be more of a focus on injury prevention or looking for signs of potential injury in the future with the Tigers. Got another question here from Dan about Lou Whitaker being snubbed from the Hall of Fame. With things like this, how tough was or is it to learn about the history of a team that you didn't follow growing up when you were trying to cover the now, but also put it in proper perspective? A fun question here. It'd be easier probably to write about Lou Whitaker if I watched Lou Whitaker play. He was, I was just a little kid as he was in the final years of his career. But I guess I'm lucky in that my grandmother was a local historian, and my grandfather on the other side of my family is a historian, and I love history, and I think it's important to be educated on the history of what you are covering, whether it's a sports team, whether you cover city council. You should probably know about the history of the city you're covering and all the factors that play into it. I can't always provide the same perspective maybe as someone who was there and who covered it. But I've written a lot about Lou Whitaker. I've tried to really educate myself. I did a story on Lou Whitaker in the winter of 2019 that I think is as detailed as anything anyone has ever written on Lou. Dived way too deep into Ty Cobb and things of that nature. So you know, I take it upon myself to read old books and go through newspaper archives and try to educate myself. Maybe not everyone does that, but I think I naturally just find that stuff fascinating. So hopefully I do a decent job of all that. Got one here from Rogelio. For the first time, I've been paying attention to minors long ago. For the first time since Tremel, Whitaker, Paris, Moorish have some particular regulars. And yeah, Roger's going to know more about the minor leagues than even I do. He does a great job covering that all the way up and down the system and talking with these prospects. And he's got pretty good tabs on that. Stuart Shea, what are the expectations for Akil Baddoo, or are there any? I'm really interested. I think you never know with Hinch and the Tigers and injuries, but I think it's going to be hard to carry Akil Baddoo and Kerry Carpenter on the same roster. I think they're basically contending for a fourth outfielder spot. They're both left-handed batters, and they have almost polar opposite skill sets. You know, Carpenter is power, some upside with the bat, had a great year in the minors, not regarded as a good fielder, and doesn't really do anything outside the batter's box. Baddoo brings you you know, base running, a lot of little things. He's not great in the field either. At his best, he's more of a tough at bat, 2 strikes, contact hitter type of guy, although he might have the potential for more power. I worry about Akil at the plate. He obviously really struggled last year. His swing, his bat path could get real weird and choppy. He was fighting a lot of things last year. At the same time, I think he does so many of these baseball skills that we're kind of talking about, and we forget as a Rule 5 pick how much of his development he skipped. You know, barely played in the minor leagues before he was thrust into the majors. I think Kerry Carpenter is going to really have to rake to justify the roster spot. I think Akil just gives you, you know, he can be a pinch runner. He can do more. He can just do so much for you on a baseball diamond. I think AJ Hinch really likes that. At the same time, he's obviously going to have to earn that spot. He can't be a liability at the plate. The best version of Akil Baddoo is he's drawing walks, and he's got a 330 plus on base percentage, and maybe he's your leadoff hitter and he steals 20 plus bags. And, you know, if he shows a little power, that's a plus. I don't know that I'm saying that's my expectation for him. But that's probably best case scenario. I do think it's fair to worry about Akil at the plate at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah, Pacheco. Yeah, we'll see. I'm interested to watch Pacheco in spring training, Raj. Haven't seen him a ton in person since last spring. I don't know. What are the prospects for the Tiger bullpen? You know, I think this is where you're seeing the Tigers really double down on their player development on Chris Fetter, Robin Lund, who they now hired. You know, obviously they traded away Gregory Soto, Joe Jimenez, and at least not yet, they have not replaced those guys with anyone on a major league contract. I think they're pretty confident in their ability to get the most out of some other guys. I wouldn't be shocked at all. I don't think AJ Hinch is going to use the word closer like all season. Going to be a running joke, but I think Alex Lang will pitch the 9th inning a lot, and I think they believe he can be really good. I think they see Bo Brisky as being a guy who, you know, he's not going to be in the rotation to start the year provided everyone's healthy. I think they think he can do some things out of the bullpen. I think you look at some of the guys they've signed on minor league deals this winter. You know, there's a lefty, there's a righty with Uceta with really high strikeout rates. They're trying to optimize these guys, and they seem to have faith that they can do it. It's a little bit hard to feel confident that their bullpen will be as good as it was last season, just because you traded arguably your 2 best relievers. We'll see if they're done. They could still look into adding a lefty, although I think they're probably getting priced out on guys like Andrew Chafin, who contenders are going to, and Kind of surprised Michael Fulmer hasn't signed anywhere yet. He could still be somewhat low cost and maybe return and then be an 8th or 9th inning option. And so we will see, but I do think last year provides evidence that the Tigers know what they're doing in the pitching department more than anywhere. And I think you see that in the way they've constructed their roster. One more from Francis. Is Spencer Torkelson now held in as high esteem by the organization as he was when he was drafted? Yes and no. I mean, I think there's still a lot of faith in Torkelson. You see that by the fact there's not really a plan B for the Tigers at first base right now. But I think there is a more, everyone's kind of probably bracing themselves a little bit. I think even at the least, I think maybe people, even within the organization, have lowered their opinion on what his ceiling can be. Maybe it's like, okay, let's not worry about whether this guy is going to be a Hall of Famer. Let's try to get him to be a productive big leaguer before we really start looking beyond that. So that's probably the best way to frame it. I think it's more become like, okay, we really have to find out what Torkelson can be in 2023. I'm not sure if I agree with it or not, but that's probably one reason there's not much of a contingency plan at first. I think they're just going to let him play. Because going into 2024 and beyond, you got to know what you have there. And so I think they're going to give this guy every single opportunity to play and to improve and to develop. But he was supposed to be this can't miss hitter. And he's obviously struggled a lot in his indoctrination to the major league level. So naturally that's come with a little bit of lowering of the expectations, even internally, and probably especially among, this current front office is not the one that drafted him. I mean, AJ Hinch loved Torkelson, but I think has even taken more of that view of, let's just get him to be productive before we really start worrying about what is his ceiling. So it looks like that's all the current questions we have in the queue. And I think I was only supposed to speak until 2, but if there are any follow-ups or last minute questions, I'm happy to answer.
Of course, we're not going to run you out of town, but thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
With Torkelson, I've always had a question, and you have to read between the lines most of the time. Is one of his problems coachability, that he just doesn't take advice well?
I'm starting to worry about Torkelson mentally more than anything. As we've all seen, he's been reluctant to really make changes to his swing. He said even last week, my swing works. It didn't seem to work for him last season. It's kind of interesting because it was, again, he was viewed as this can't miss hitter. I liked his swing coming out of the draft. It was so clean and simple and mechanical. But Major League pitching kind of exposed him. He's not athletic in the box. I'd almost like to see him have more of a load, even a leg kick. And the Tigers have definitely talked to him. I don't know necessarily about what specific adjustments, but they've talked to him about being an athlete, being a little more free flowing in the box. How often do you see Jose Altuve or Carlos Correa finish in this picture perfect pose? Some hitters do that, but a lot of good hitters don't. They just have an uncanny way of putting the barrel on the baseball. Torque has never struck me as like a arrogant guy or uncoachable guy. He's a really nice kid. But for some reason, it does seem like he's been a little bit stubborn. So again, I'm really interested to see what he looks like when he shows up in spring and what he has actually been doing this offseason. I think we'll learn a lot about what's actually going on there. I see one more question here from Jerry. Is there any upside for the Tigers in 2023? I think you make a good point in that, look, Austin Meadows just being healthy is huge. Baez could easily have a better year. I definitely expect Jonathan Scope to have a better year. The way I see the Tigers, though, is, they could win 75-ish games. They could have a trajectory where they play good baseball and they're more like the 2021 team. What I don't see is much of an upside beyond that. I think there are a lot of young players, a lot of holes left on this roster. To me, my upside is kind of 75 to 80 wins, and that's probably best case scenario. But maybe I've just become too pessimistic. We'll see what happens come spring training.
Cody, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. You won't be able to hear everyone, but everyone is very appreciative. Look forward to touching base with you during the season. And of course, all of us read him religiously, right? All of us read Cody's pieces in the Athletic religiously. So thanks a lot. Hopefully this season will not be penal servitude like last season.
Yeah, I'm hoping my bar tab ends up being a little lower than last year's.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Really appreciate it. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And
Thank you, Cody.
have a good one. Yeah.
Okay, folks, since Cody ran long, which I'm sure no one complained about, I'm going to skip the discussion of the trivia quiz answers. I will tell you, I put together a 20-question trivia quiz about Comerica Park and the Tigers during the Comerica Park era. It's really, if you're not a Tigers fan, it's going to be pretty tough. If you're a Tigers fan, you probably know a lot of it. I don't put together trivia questions to trick people, although, you know, there is some of that inevitably involved. What I do is try to point out something that you may not have thought about, or the significance of something you knew about, or some unexplained or unexplored aspect of it. I generally don't really care how many questions people get right. I care about how much they enjoyed it and how much they learned. So Rogelio has posted that for us. At 3 o'clock, he will post the version with the answers. You're welcome to email me if you have any comments or complaints. And I'm sorry we won't get a chance to discuss it now, but we're going to start a panel on the Comerica Park ballpark changes here shortly. I see Kevin Johnson is trying to put his clothes on and turn the camera on. And I'm proud to have two ballpark experts with me, Kevin Johnson of Seamheads, who is co-chair of the SABR Ballparks Committee. I was co-chair with Kevin for several years. He's a great guy, a good co-chair, and a real expert on this. And Stuart Shea from Chicago, who is, despite all the crappy Wrigley Field books out there, he is the real expert on Wrigley Field. And he helped me compile a ballpark database that we sold to Sports Reference. And Stu was also co-author with me on the 2009 book, Big League Ballparks, which my non-objective opinion is still the best historical discussion of ballparks in Major League history, and particularly the development, how and why things changed and how ballparks developed. Unfortunately, that book is out of print, but it was really fascinating research. So I'm very pleased to have the two of them, and we're going to talk about the changes at Comerica Park and about Comerica Park in general, and also how much player attitudes towards the way a ballpark plays should influence clubs' decisions. I will let you type in your questions. I'm going to let Stu and Kevin pick questions as they want and try not to get in the middle too much. So welcome, Stu. Welcome, Kevin. You want to each say something to start off?
Sure. Sure. I'll start. Yeah, thanks for having me. I kind of enjoy these SABR meetings. I occasionally get to zoom in on a few across the country. So usually more just to listen, but anyway, it's kind of interesting, the changes that the Tigers are making. So I'm very happy to be here and discuss that with you guys.
Yeah, I'm really glad. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. I'm really glad to be here too. I'm from Chicago, but I find this chapter really a lot of fun. I really enjoy the Detroit chapter because there occasionally there's no need, for like a lot of coffee when I come to these meetings, whereas when Chicago, you've got to have it injected into you to stay awake. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk about Comerica because it always seemed to me from the moment it opened to be a very, very strange ballpark in its design philosophy, in its in the way that they made it such a cavernous ballpark from the very beginning. And I understand why they did that, I think, in a way, but I found it a very curious decision in that it seemed to buck the trend of a lot of other ballparks from the same era that were built to be smaller, more intimate, and create a sense of artificial ticket scarcity, as well as a more modern, sort of close to the audience approach. So yeah, it'll be fun to talk about this.
Right, and Stu points out one of the salient aspects of Comerica Park in a city that was accustomed to a hitter's park and loved Tiger Stadium. Somebody from out of town, and I'm not criticizing out of towners, I'm one of them, I'm not a Detroit native. Someone from out of town came in and said, we're going to put together a really cool pitcher's park. And I don't think that John McHale Jr. understood the psychology of the Tigers fan base. He put it together based on his experience in Colorado. And he did the opposite. You know, it seems to me he wanted the opposite of Coors Field, and he got that, and the fans hated it. I mean, it actually helped the Tigers, and that Juan Gonzalez, because he was so upset about the hitting in Comerica Park, that he left the club after turning down what at the time was an absolutely enormous offer. That saved the Tigers payroll, I figure, for 5 years, that he was so arrogant to turn it down. But other than that, the fans didn't like the ballpark. The honeymoon in terms of attendance was very short. It cost Randy Smith his job. John McHale moved on to the commissioner's office or to troubleshoot Tampa Bay for the commissioner. And we were left with the consequences.
Is that job done, Gary? Troubleshooting Tampa, because it seems like every year it gets worse.
Well, I think he was, I don't actually remember what his mandate was there. He was on special assignment. I don't know if he was there to exercise the ghost of the
Nemoli era.
Yeah, the Nemoli era. I mean, one of the worst managed clubs of the last 50 years, if not the worst. But no, it was interesting that with a loyal fan base and with so many people with connections to Detroit baseball, that the Tigers picked John McHale to shepherd in the design of the new ballpark. Of course, he had a connection too. His father was GM of the Tigers in the late 50s.
Right.
So he did have a connection, but he certainly didn't have the feel for the Tigers fan base. And I think the Tigers have been trying to make Comerica Park the kind of ballpark their fans will like ever since. And the latest changes are essentially that. They're making it more favorable for hitters, and it won't play as quite as big a pitcher's park. And that could have been done right at the start. They could have built a park that was, even if it wasn't a good hitter's park, they could have built a park that was played more fairly. Instead, they built this cavern that pitchers like, and a small number of aesthetes like, and most fans don't like, and the hitters, of course, hate. So, questions. Let's start taking questions.
Well, let's see. Here's one from Thomas Habits. None of the content of the team's PR and media coverage included info about what's happening with the new spaces created by moving the fences in. When they moved the fences in 2003, they moved the bullpens from right to left to take up that space. It was a wasted opportunity to bring fans closer to the field. This time, are there any plans or interest in using this dimension change to actually help the sightlines for spectators? Great question.
It's a good question. I have one point though. The bullpens weren't moved when the fences were moved. The bullpens were moved in 2005 after they had tested the fences, the temporary fence in left field for 2 years, and concluded they wanted to keep it. In fact, I'm pretty sure when they changed the fence in left field in 2003, they announced it as a temporary thing. And in 2005, they moved the bullpens from right field behind that fence,
right,
which also allowed them to add 950 seats, which was a good thing because that's paying revenue. But go ahead, Stu.
Well, Kevin knows, I think, far more about this than I do, but the only thing that I would answer with this is that, when you build it, it's easier to make a ballpark smaller than it is to make it bigger. And when you build a ballpark that's cavernous, that means you're allowing for the possibility of adding more seats, as Gary, you just said. And they've clearly done this. I'm not sure whether you can really do a lot to make the sight lines are really good in the lower deck at Comerica, but like a lot of new ballparks, the lower deck stretches very, very far back and the upper deck kind of goes high over it. A lot of the ballparks, like Cleveland is like that, Detroit's like that, Chicago was like that until the White Sox made some changes a few years ago. So a big part of the economic reason of building a ballpark like this is the opportunity to add increased seating and have increased seating closer to the ballpark when you actually bring in the fences. But I always thought it was crazy that they had what essentially was a moat behind the left field and fence for such a long time. And even now, it just strikes me that it's a very 1970s kind of way of looking at the outfield experience, especially in left field. It's really, really far away from the fans. And fans really like outfielders going up against the fences and trying to catch home runs. And they like, and when Camden Yards changed that, I think that they lost a little bit of charm from that as well. Kevin,
Yeah,
you probably have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
fans,
well-
hang on, I want to jump in here. The fans, especially like me, will dump their beers on outfielders from the other team going up against the fence. That's really popular.
Yeah, so I haven't seen the Tigers say anything either, but it's center field, so you can't really add seats in center field, right? So they're not really gaining anything as far as revenue that I could figure. I guess they could somehow put a, I don't know, beer garden behind the fence or something. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me it's conducive to doing anything with it. I saw somebody put shrubs in the chat. Yeah, it's something like that, right? It's not a huge area. I mean, they're moving the fence in, but it's not going to be huge. It's just the center field fence, right?
Maybe they can put a monument park back there, move the statues down there and have a monument park.
I wonder if they could do something like the White Sox did with Comiskey, because there's that huge batter's eye back there with the trees and stuff that looks really beautiful. But it seems to me like you could maybe cut that in half and put maybe a really nice patio where the upper half of the batter's eye is right now. I think that could be fantastic.
Yeah, the change, unless somebody knows differently, the change seems to me to be motivated to placate the hitters with the theory that the pitchers aren't going to grumble too much because it's not that severe. And I think also the pitchers know that very few home runs get hit to center field. I think the lowering the height of the fence is more important than the decrease in distance to center field, because while they talk endlessly about batters barreling the ball and getting, having 425 foot out, those are very rare. And it's much more, most home runs are hit to the power alleys or down the lines. So changing the distance in center field is a marginal improvement for the hitters. And I think the pitchers understand that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, Gary, right? You want to know what kind of impact or how many balls it's going to impact? Well, here's about what you have. About 2 handfuls for the year that last year were caught, or not even caught. Some of them were caught. Last year stayed in play, and this year will go over the fence. So it's not a big impact at all. Now, some of those were, were triples or doubles. They weren't all outs. Out of the, I think there were like 8 maybe balls that would be over the fence with the new configuration that stayed in last year. I've seen 8 as one of the numbers. So you're not talking about a big impact there. Where you do see impact is the fence is closer. There's impact on balls that don't travel all the 400 feet. If they bounce short of the fence or they roll to the fence, they're going to be closer. They're going to be, the center fielder can pick them up and he's got less, distance to throw. So you may see fewer triples. you know.
I think that's a real interesting point, Kevin. And it says something about maybe that the Tigers are actually more interested in the future of Riley Green than they are in any other player being affected by this. Riley Green was the guy who played the most games in the outfield for the Tigers yesterday, last year rather, which was 93, which is kind of amazing to think about. Even though he was injured and a rookie, at 21, he came in and played a very good center field. And I think this could actually really help him become one of the best regarded center fielders in the league. And it will cut down probably the amount of triples, and Comerica has always been a big triples park. But the whole thing about this idea of tailoring the ballpark to the players, it's kind of confusing to me, because Scott Harris said during the winter meetings that he did not want to have a more neutral ballpark, that he liked the idea of having differences in the dimensions and sort of asymmetricality. Whereas it seemed like when you talked to the pitchers recently about these changes, they're all saying, yeah, it's good, the hitters are going to like it, it's more neutral. So I feel like there's maybe a kind of a messaging conflict there between what Harris wants to do and how the players are being asked to comment on it, or the way that they comment on it. Maybe that they just sort of, I wish I could be in the mindset of the players to say, yeah, really, they like the fact that it's more neutral for the hitters, or it's perceived to be more neutral for the hitters. But as you said, Kevin, center field is not left field. Camden Yards changed a lot last year because of the changes in left field, but this is going to be a very different kind of a change.
Yeah, and the Comerica change back in 2003 was significant, right? It was left
Right,
center.
absolutely.
It was left center. That was a big change, and it did have an impact. But in this case, again, the center fielder can play up more. So you have a single to center field, he's closer. So the guy can't necessarily go first to third like he does today, right? Or even second to home. And some of those balls in the gaps, that today are triples are going to be doubles, or if there's a man on first, today he would score on a double, and this coming year he might not. So it's not necessarily that advantageous for the hitters. I think it's more of a perception that it's going to be more hitter friendly.
Yeah, one of the things I think that's interesting about Comerica Park is it's so different than Tiger Stadium was in so many ways, but in one way it's very simpler. Tiger Stadium, at least for the last 20 years, was not a great hitter's park, but its reputation as a great hitter's park never stopped. I mean, I think if you took 100 Tigers fans in 1995 and said, is Tiger Stadium a good hitter's park, a hitter's park, a sort of neutral park, a pitcher's park, 90% of them would have said a good hitter's park. And that wasn't true. Tiger Stadium in its last 20 years was always a good home run park. It never lost that, but it played as a pitcher's park some years, because the part of calculating the park factor is what are other parks in the league like? If people start building hitters parks, your park becomes a pitcher's park, even if you haven't changed it. And Tiger Stadium its last 20 years was sometimes a pitcher's park, sometimes a hitter's park, always a good home run park, but it never lost a reputation of being a good hitter's park. In Comerica's case, and this is part of the trivia quiz, I asked, what was the first year in which Comerica Park became a hitter's park according to Baseball Reference? Now, I know there are other park factor calculations. Pete Palmer and I did them, and I'm sure Seam had you do them, but I picked Baseball Reference because everyone can look it up easily. 2007. So it was only 7 years after it opened where it had both a pitcher's park factor and a batter's park factor over 100. And so we're already 15 years past that. And yet I think most people perceive it as a good pitcher's park, a good to great pitcher's park. Another trivia question I asked was, in the last 12 season, how many years has it played as a hitter's park? Again, according to the Baseball Reference 1 year calculation. 7 years out of the last 12, it's played as a hitter's park. And I don't think the public perception of that, or the players' perception of that, has ever caught up to the reality. It's not a great pitcher's park anymore. It hasn't been there in 15 years. It's neutral to a decent hitter's park. Some years of the pitcher's park, some years of the hitter's park, generally not too extreme. The movement of the fences in left and left center was huge. That's something they should have done. They should have put the fences there in the first place. And once the hitters got used to that. It became, you know, a neutral to decent pitcher's park, would play as a hitter's park many years.
Yeah, you're right. From about 2007 to 2018, by my calculations, it's almost neutral during that whole time. But for home runs, it's not, right. It's singles and triples.
Right.
It's a very good. It's matter of fact, it's the best triples park. It's better than Coors even. So, but that's how it kind of got propped up to be pretty much a neutral park, at least during those years. But not a good home run park, especially for left-handers. It's still not good. But in the last few years, has been trending back towards pitching park after 2018.
Right.
So that's probably what's motivating maybe some of the movement here is, again, the perception.
Well, that actually really dovetails nicely into Craig's question. How much, if any, of the rejection of Comerica cascades from town sentimentality of Tiger Stadium?
Why?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's a lot easier to go completely the other direction than to try to duplicate the strengths of an old stadium that you're trying to replace, because a lot of the things that people loved about Tiger Stadium, for about 50,000 fans, it was a great experience. But for the 900 or 1,000 that were kind of stuck behind a post, looking down from the left or right field line, they may not have felt so sentimental about it. Same with Wrigley Field, County Stadium, any of these other ballparks that had that kind of construction. But I mean, well, I don't know, show of hands. I mean, how many people would rather see a game at Comerica than Tiger Stadium? Okay,
Well,
there's a couple. That's good. Okay, Alex just put his camera on so he could raise his. Did he raise his hand? No, I don't see Alex raise his hand. So we have a few, but that doesn't seem to be an overwhelming endorsement.
I want to offer a nuanced view of that. I would rather see a game at Tiger Stadium, but I can tell you my wife and kids like Comerica Park. And, and as you said, for 15,000 fans, Tiger Stadium was great. For the 35,000 fan, it was not so good. And for the 50,000 fan, it sucked. But of course, if you have 50,000 fans in the ballpark, pretty much everyone's having a good time, because you rarely draw 50,000 fans or a bad club. And so Tiger Stadium, I think, had a lot of charm, but the defects tended to be minimized by all the pundits and the writers who dismissed them. But that's because they weren't sitting behind a post. Right. I remember in the '87 ALCS, I had tickets to all the games, and I took my father, who was a Tigers fan, had been a Tigers fan for 40 years at that point, 45 years. And we sat behind a post in right field. We didn't get a discount on our tickets because the standard was if you could see home plate or the pitcher's mound and two other bases, it wasn't obstructed view. So we paid a lot of money and got a lot of neck strain. We actually rotated our seats, the group of four, because the person next to the post had to crane their neck way around the post, and it was uncomfortable. And we would rotate our seats every other inning, so everyone could at least see a goodly portion of the field.
Well, I know the posts are bad, but the post allowed you to have the second deck much closer. And what you have now is, if you're in the second deck, you're way away from the field, right? And so there is a trade-off. I mean, it's posts are bad, but the way they designed the second decks on the new stadiums, if you're sitting in the second deck, you're so much farther from the action than you were like in that Tiger Stadium.
Yeah, I've never sat in the upper deck at Comerica, but it looks to me like, well, I remember sitting in the last row of the upper deck at US Cellular Field, or whatever it's called now, in the first year it was open, and it was literally frightening to look down. I always was worried that I was going to fall down the stairs if I went to get, something to eat. And I just don't think that's a great experience for the fans.
Right, but the pitch of the upper deck in Detroit is not as bad as it was in Chicago. That was an extreme case. And I hated the upper deck at US Cellular, or New Comiskey was as well. But I'm going to say that I've talked to lots of people. We had for years upper deck seats at Comerica Park, and we had for years before that season tickets on the lower deck, only 5 rows off the railing, just beyond third base. And because of the very gentle seat pitch to get all those seats on the lower deck, people complained about not being able to see over the people in front of them, anyone who was short or even average height. So the Tigers' design choice to put so many seats on the lower deck and a very gentle seat pitch meant that the upper deck was farther away. But when we moved to seats in the upper deck, we were right on the railing. No one ever complained. People love those seats. I mean, I think casual fans, and that's most fans, would rather have an unobstructed sight line than have an obstructed sight line and be closer to the action. I think SABR members and diehard baseball fans would rather be closer to the action and put up with the obstructions. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a good demarcation. Let's see. Here's a question, folks. If one were designing a new ballpark today, what features or characteristics would you include? That's Bill's question. Kevin, what do you think?
Well, one thing I like with the new ballparks is the ability to go around the concourse, right, and still see the action. So, to me, that is a big improvement over some of the older ballparks. So that would be like number one, right? Because with all the concessions and things that are going to be part of the ballpark experience, being able to actually see the action from the concourse is important. And then personally, of course, I don't mind a little bit of a pitcher's park, and some quirky dimensions. I like quirky dimension parks. So, those things that you can put in that are somehow related to the city that you're in, if you could build the architecture to kind of match the city, that's always a good thing to me. So those are the things that come off the top of my head.
I think that the bit about asymmetrical dimensions, obviously this was something that was born of necessity 100 years ago when ballparks were built, in city blocks and such. But, I grew up in the era of the multi-purpose stadium, Busch, Three Rivers, the Vet, places like that, even, Sky Dome, Rogers Center, Miller Park. These to me were not interesting ballparks. And so modernity did not always to me breed likability. And, I feel like it's possible to do something that's distinctive without necessarily having Tal's Hill in center field, which
Right.
actually could cause players grievous injury.
Which thankfully Taos Hill is gone now, thankfully.
Yes,
Yeah.
thankfully. And I believe Tal is gone from the baseball scene as well. I think.
You
but-
mean dead or retired?
I think retired.
Yeah.
But I sometimes wonder whether there's a real tension now between the idea of having neutrality for the purposes of competitive advantage versus individuality for ballparks. Like sometimes I think to myself, maybe we're going to get to a point where it's mandated that all stadiums have the exact same dimensions because it'll be for a more efficient game and give everybody a better chance to be competitive. I hope that never happens because I love the fact that Wrigley Field looks the way it does. I love the fact that Tiger Stadium looked the way it does, that Houston looks like it does now. I mean, Houston's a lovely looking ballpark now. But I do wonder sometimes if the idea of a neutral ballpark is actually the way to go. Whether it really does help you, especially if you were a team that depended a lot on speed, like Whitey Herzog's teams in the 70s and 80s, took advantage of artificial turf. They just have their guys hit short pop-ups and let them, fall in front of the outfielders and bounce over the outfielders' heads, or put the ball on the ground and just run forever because the ball would bounce through all these turf stadiums. Those teams might not have been able to win in an era in which there wasn't as much artificial turf. So tailoring your team to the ballpark seems to me kind of a dangerous idea, because what happens if your best player gets hurt? What happens if you have a great slugger on your team and your pitchers are revolting and you move the fences back a few feet, you get the Juan Gonzalez situation, which happened to work out well for the Tigers. But I often wonder, and anybody here, please weigh in with this. Would you prefer to see them? Would you prefer to see the Tigers just have a neutral, quote unquote, ballpark, build what they think is the best team that can win everywhere, rather than just to win at home?
Well, I think the answer to that is Tigers fans are so desperate for a team that will win anywhere that they're not fussy. I mean, I have to tell you that I really enjoyed Cody because he was only in the beat 4 years, and he's already got let's say some ennui about supporting losing teams, and rightly so. I mean, it's been brutal covering the Tigers in recent years. But I don't think Tigers fans would be fussy anymore. I think they'd support a team that bashed the other clubs into submission with home runs. I think they'd support a team that was built around pitching. I think they just want somebody to show that that they're going to win, and B, that they care about the fans. Because I think the Tigers fan base has been so enervated by just the apparent unwillingness to build a good ball club. I know that the Tigers have tried, and I know that all teams try, but there are some teams that try more than others.
There's some good questions here. Dan's question about nets down the lines. I have to be honest, I have not been to a major league ballpark since about 2017. I have been to minor league ballparks where that is not, independent league ballparks where that's not the case. It's more like watch your head if you're in an independent league ballpark. But again, from people who've actually been to the ballpark and are sitting in those seats down the lines or behind the plate in the lower deck, does it really, do you find it distracting at this point, having been there for a few years? Because I'll say, as a television viewer, it doesn't get in the way at all.
Yeah, I think that the problem is that we're the kind of fans who are going to pay attention, but the people sitting next to us and behind us aren't, and they're the ones who are going to get the fractured skull. I mean, I don't like all that netting. On the other hand, it probably will save people's lives. As much as we don't want to think about it, people do get killed at ballparks by foul balls. And while it's not common, and it's certainly less dangerous than most things people do, including driving to the store, especially driving home from a bar or a party where alcohol is served, people do get killed, and that's just really horrible. What I wonder is the standard reason people give for all this netting is because the parks are more intimate and players are stronger and they hit the ball harder. But players always hit really hard line drives, and the classic era ballparks were close to the field. It was the multi-purpose parks that weren't. And yet people didn't get killed back then. And I think the answer is people were paying attention. Right now, I think there are probably more fans looking at their phone at any point in the game that are watching the batter and watching the action.
Well, the grumpy old man in me says definitely the phones are a factor, but I wonder if also the teams are encouraging this by their video board displays and the endless amount of music and the endless amount of ads and just the constant flashing lights around the facades of the second deck in pretty much every ballpark. I don't think that the teams are utterly blameless in this. I don't think it's just the fans, personally.
Yeah.
No, I don't, and I think the fans need to be protected, even if they're looking at their phone or looking at the scoreboard, because you could just turn to talk to the person next to you and you could get hit by a foul ball.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that 40 years ago, your typical crowd was 15 or 20,000, and on a weeknight, in May, it might be 8,000. And now crowds are roughly twice as large on average. And there are more casual fans. They know less about the game. They pay less attention, and they have more distractions, some of which the club puts in front of them, kiss cam or really loud music. or somebody on the field asking trivia questions between, well, of course, between innings, no one's going to get hurt. But some of the distractions the fans bring themselves, but you have to protect them. And that's something that makes the game less enjoyable for the hardcore fans like us.
Yeah, I mean, also the pitchers throwing harder and nastier than they've ever had, I'm sure plays a part in that. Because if you're a hitter who's making contact with a pitch that has tremendous backspin on it, you got a good chance of hitting that ball down a line. And back, 80, 90, 100 years ago, it was just about making contact, right? It wasn't about swinging for the fences. And I think also seats are much closer to the field now than they've generally been ever, with a couple of exceptions.
Yeah, I'm not sure about it depends on how far back you, but certainly closer to the field since the wave of post-war ballparks were built.
Right, the Oaklands and the.
We are at 2:45 here. We need to wrap this up by 2:50 so we can do a little bit of chapter business. But I want to pick up a question here from Donna Muscarella, who is from New Jersey, and she's got the facade of Hinchliffe Stadium on her view, which is one of the 4 other existing Negro League ballparks besides Hamtramck Stadium. Donna points out that the ability to bet on every aspect of the game from their phone, and the implication is this is going to be another distraction, and it really is. I mean, when my son asked me a couple of years ago about legal betting on baseball, I told him I wasn't against it because I don't generally believe you should try to prohibit stuff that people are going to do anyway if you can't police it. And aside from that, most of it's innocent. But I really despise prop bets. Prop bets, especially during a game, are you just fleece everyone. I saw something recently where they said that these gambling operations make X% profit. I can't remember what it was off regular bets, but they made like 3 times as much profit off prop bets. And so they're trying to push everybody into prop bets. And in baseball, it's just an orgy of things you can make prop bets on. And so that's something that I really think is going to be bad for the fans, because a lot of them are going to lose a lot of money. A lot of kids are going to have to work to go to college because dad spent their college fund on prop bets. So it's 2:47 here. I'm going to let Stu and Kevin talk for a minute or so to sum up, and then we're going to move to talking about future stuff we're going to do in the chapter this year. So Kevin, you want to summarize?
Sure. So I guess my summary as far as the changes to the park are that I think they're more, I don't know if cosmetic's the right word, but I think they more have to do with the perception of the park as being such a pitcher's park. So it may actually be then kind of geared more toward the players than the fans, the changes. And again, I don't think the changes are going to really have a big impact. They'll have some impact, but I don't think it's suddenly going to turn the park into a hitter's paradise for sure. It may change the way the park plays. Again, fewer triples, so which is kind of unfortunate in a way, because I like triples, so it's wouldn't be the way I'd want to go. But I understand it. It's still not a good home run park, and it probably still will not. It will continue to not be a good home run park.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, the Tigers were last in the league in home runs last year, and I don't think that moving the fences in a few feet is going to change that much.
Yeah, but that's because the Tigers last year couldn't hit the water if they jumped out of a boat.
Out of a boat, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to ask Cody, that I didn't have a chance, whether he actually thinks that Riley Green was the best player on the Tigers last year, and I would argue that he might have been
Certainly the
player on the
most
whole team.
interesting. Yeah.
It seems to me that if you're gonna make ballpark changes to build, if you're interested in doing it to build around young talent, then they have the right idea by decreasing the amount of space that Riley Green has to run to make play, so that he's actually making plays at more of an, at a more average level. That's going to help them a lot. The pitchers, I'm sure they hate it, but you know, if a guy gives up a 415-foot blast to center field, it ought to be a home run anyway, you know, much less 400, you know, 410. So Kevin's right. It's going to decrease the triples, which is too bad because it is fun to see triples. But, you know, I don't remember anybody really complaining that much when Tiger Stadium was 440 feet to center, right? I mean, that was a kind of a wonderful thing about that ballpark, that it was cavernous, that it really required somebody to play a good center field. And they had some great center fielders in that ballpark.
Right. I agree. I don't think people appreciate how what really matters is the power alleys. Tiger Stadium had great power alleys, and the center field was just a chance for a good center fielder to make spectacular plays.
Right.
I remember when Doyle Alexander came to the Tigers in '87. Remember, there's that famous trade, and he went 9-0. The Tigers won all 11 of his starts. The Tigers won the division and should have gone to the World Series that year. And someone asked him what a success was, and he said something like, keep the ball, put the ball over the plate, make him hit it to center field, and then, you know, basically watch Chet Lemon go get it, you know.
Right.
And it's such a smart strategy. And I have appreciated very much over the years watching the Tiger center fielders, you know, Curtis Granderson and Austin Jackson and now Riley Green. Watching them play has been terrific. But
Yep. One other thing, Gary, we didn't talk about it much, but the wall heights are also coming down, right? So
right, I mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, you might have mentioned it, but that is a kind of fan base
Yep.
thing, right? That is a exciting play when somebody goes up and robs
Right.
a home run. So and that, I don't think that has anything to do with the player, you know, trying to make the players happy. I think that is a fan experience thing that they are doing. So it's not totally, you know.
It's partly players, because they made a point of saying they were going to reconstruct the outfield walls and pad them better so players wouldn't get injured. And part of that is to protect their players, but part of it is because then if the players can hit the wall hard and know they won't get injured, they'll make more spectacular plays.
Right.
I just found it interesting that one final comment about that is that one of the really appealing things to me about Camden Yards was its proximity to the field. And they made that big change where I felt like they didn't have to make that kind of a change. I didn't feel it was necessary to make that dramatic of a change to the field at that park. But I am happy that they're going to actually allow for more sort of wall climbing catches at Comerica this year.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Okay, I'd love to go longer, but we only have the SABR account for 2 hours. So I thank Kevin, I thank Stu, and we're going to have 7 minutes here of talking about stuff we're going to do with the chapter this year. I appreciate everyone who stuck on the Zoom this long. We've had anywhere from 29 to 32 people for the whole meeting. We're down at 28 now. A really good meeting, and I appreciate everyone who checked in. So right now, I want to remind people that we're going to be announcing, and Dan Diodana will be taking the lead on this, a prospective in-person meeting in St. Joseph, Michigan, to tour the House of David Museum. It is just chock full of baseball memorabilia stuff. You can't believe how packed it is. This is, Dan, we're looking at August or September, is that right?
Yes. Our thought was that it gives people enough time to kind of plan some things, but it also isn't during heavy summer vacation time. And it's, you know, for a day trip.
And because we need to get several dozen people to make it worthwhile for them to bring in a guest, we're going to ask the Chicago, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, and Toledo chapters if they want to join us there. You'll be hearing more about that via SABR, your SABR account, message account, or via email from us. And we will do either a lunch before the tour or a dinner afterward, depending on the time. Right now, I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Wackett, a friend of mine. Jeff is going to talk about our upcoming book club discussion, which he has suggested before, and I'll let him take it away. Jeff, you're out there somewhere, right?
Yep. Hey, Gary. Hey, everyone. Glad to be here. Great conversations.
Jeff Watrick.
Yeah, it's a long time, Stu. How are you?
Great. You?
Good. I don't have my camera on. There we go. So yeah, so Gary and I have been talking for probably the better part of a year about doing a book club conversation about the Mark Harris, Henry Wiggin books, all 4 of them. And then and maybe even including something about the film. So I read those books first in high school, and I've read them again a couple times. And to my knowledge, I think it's probably the only literary baseball work that's kind of epic in that it goes through the player Henry Wiggins, whole career trajectory into middle age, which it's just great. They're still among my favorite books of all time, and excited to at some point here in the future lead a discussion on them. So anything else I need to add, Gary?
I'm sorry, what?
Anything else
No, I just want, Jeff and I will pick a meeting date. We'll announce it sometime in the next month. But I want everyone to think about this. There are 4 of the novels. Of course, Bang the Drum Slowly is most famous. I think it's probably only the second best, don't you, Jeff?
Boy, yeah. I mean, I think that'll be a great topic question. I kind of tend to agree with you that the Southpaw, the first one, is really the best of them. But I think you could also probably make a case that It Looked Like Forever, the final one, is in some ways the most
profound.
Yes, that's a great word for it.
Right.
Yeah, I remember reading that one when I was 18 or 19 and just disliking it, and then coming back to it when I was about 30 and being like,
right,
recognizing how right on it was. So
I'm going to encourage everyone to read up on them if you haven't read them before. And if you read Bang the Drum Slowly, but not any of the other 3, it's worth it. The only really weak one I feel is a third Ticket for a Seam Stitch, which is very slender. You could read it in a couple of hours, but also the least interesting by far. The first and the 4th books are really strong, even stronger than Bang the Drum Slowly. And of course, while we might choose to issue a discussion of the film, I'm sure we won't be able to because so many people have seen it and there's so many connections. So thanks, Jeff, and we'll be getting more information on that. Right now, if Tim Carr is still with us, I'm going to let him talk for a minute or two till we get kicked out of the virtual room about the Irish American Baseball Society.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for this opportunity. Just want to read a little blurb here for you guys. I invite you all to join the Irish American Baseball Society. You don't have to be Irish. You just need to have an interest in the intersection of baseball and the Irish experience. We're always welcoming new baseball fans, and we have opportunities if you like to research the history of baseball here in Ireland or the history of Irish American baseball players. We have a free membership option if you'd like to get involved and see what it's all about. So I appreciate Gary having the chance to do that. And we're trying to work with SABR communities all around the country and other groups to work on common goals and history research opportunities. Thank you.
We have a question in the chat from my friend Mark Patterson on how to join.
Okay.
I will send out a link to everyone in the chapter to his website with instructions, Mark.
I appreciate that.
Okay. All right, folks, we're at 2:57, so I think we're going to get out here ahead of the broom. I'm grateful to the SABR account. Donna Muscarella said she was going back and forth between several SABR Day meetings today. I haven't paid attention to what other chapters are doing because I'm too busy trying to get our meeting together and get the trivia quiz together. I am interested in trivia quiz feedback if anyone has it. That includes critical comments. You're welcome to email me. If any of you have ideas about future meetings or other book club suggestions, we'd like to do at least 2 book clubs this year. And we'd like to, have at least one face-to-face meeting. The House of David one, of course, will be face-to-face. I'd like to do one face-to-face meeting in Detroit, assuming that the pandemic eases up again when the weather warms up. But all comments, suggestions, questions are welcome. I thank Rogelio for being our go-to guy on the social media, and Jeff for stepping up with this idea, as well as especially to our guests, Cody Stavenhagen, Kevin Johnson, Stuart Shea, and everybody else who participated. So other than that, I'm signing off.
Have a great day, everybody.
Okay, take care.